The first television in our town lived in a living room that did not belong to us. It arrived in late autumn, when the maples along Cedar Street let go of their color all at once, and the air learned to smell like smoke again. The crate came on a truck that rattled like a pocketful of nails, and two men in canvas coats wrestled it up the porch steps as if they were moving a stubborn animal into a new pen. The crate sat in the front room for 2 days, and then, without ceremony, the curtain drifted open one evening and the glass started to glow. That is how it began, with a blue square in a stranger's window and a town that had never seen an evening change shape so quickly. We were not a poor family, exactly. We were a family that counted its fortunes in coal and soup, not in machines. After the war, fathers returned with shoulders that didn't sit right and eyes that rearranged a room before they stepped into it. Mothers kept everything going by not talking about it. Children learned to measure a day by the radio and a night by the sound of dishes drying on a towel. I was one of those children, narrow as a fence picket and restless in the way of boys who hadn't grown into their feet yet. If you had asked me then what the future looked like, I would have said it looked like the back field in July, wider than your legs could run and full of a noise you couldn't catch. I didn't yet know that the future could also be a screen, the size of a window, the shape of a promise. The television belonged to Mr. Layton, who lived 3 houses down, the one with the porch swing that only moved in storms. He was a veteran, people said it with capital letters, as if the word itself stood straight-backed when you spoke it. He kept his lawn clipped in rectangles and his hedges so square you could set a glass on them. He went to work at the factory before sunrise, came home at exactly the same minute the afternoon train cut the town in half, and carried himself like an apology no one had the courage to accept. He lived alone. Some said his wife had died. Others said she had gone somewhere warmer and never remembered how to come back. He never corrected either rumor. When the blue light appeared in his window for the first time, the town took a breath it didn't know it had been holding. People slowed on their walks the way you do near a garden gate when you want to admire the roses without being caught smelling them. Men who pretended to be late for nothing were suddenly late for supper. Kids gathered as if gravity had been quietly rearranged. From the sidewalk, the picture was soft and strange, like looking at a dream through a glass of water. The figures on the screen wore hats from another century and moved as if they were remembering how to be people. A woman's face turned toward a man's shoulder and the whole room in the Layton house flickered with her expression. The sound was small, more rumor than voice, but if the air was still you could catch pieces of it. Laughter came like moths. Music like an attic humming to itself. I found my place beneath the maple. It became mine not because I claimed it, but because I was the first to stand there and the last to leave, and because habits are just devotion that forgot to introduce itself. I would finish my homework crooked on the kitchen table, stack my plates, pretend to be interested in the radio, and then drift outside with the casualness of a boy who thinks no one is watching. People were always watching, of course. But in those weeks, the screen did most of the watching for them. Some evenings the curtain was pulled only a little, the light slipping out in a narrow blade that cut the yard into before and after. On others, the fabric was drawn wide, and the room offered itself to the street like a stage that didn't need applause. I never saw the hand that moved the curtain. But I felt the intention behind it, a small courtesy extended toward the dark, as if to say, if you are out there, you may as well see clearly. It wasn't generosity of the modern kind, with speeches attached. It was a simpler grammar. The curtain opened wider when the weather turned mean, as if the light could substitute for warmth. On holidays it stayed open late, and the glow kept the porch company while neighbors walked each other home without saying the real reasons they didn't want to go inside yet. On Sundays the set was often dark, and the house returned to being a house. The blue square taught us about limits as much as it taught us about possibility. At home, Mother kept her opinions quiet so they would last longer. She allowed me my evenings beneath the maple because she understood something I did not: a boy will find a screen, even if it is a window. My father never mentioned the television. He would loosen his boots by the stove, roll his sleeves exactly twice, and listen to the ballgame on the radio with an attention that made even the announcer speak more carefully. When the crowd roared, my father smiled with only one side of his mouth, as if joy needed to be rationed like sugar. I sometimes wondered if he knew where I went at night. I decided he did. He had a veteran's gift for seeing through houses. The town shifted one evening at a time. The hardware store put a flyer in the window titled "Television is here," as if a ship had docked and we could all climb aboard. The barber began to tell jokes about antennas, and the church lady who ran the bake sale asked if screens would make sinners lazier or better informed. She wasn't sure which was worse. But for every man who argued about cost and every woman who worried about virtue, there were 5 who quietly allowed their evening to include a new kind of light. I learned the rhythms of Mr. Layton's programs. News with a confident voice that never seemed to breathe. A comedy whose timing made even the hedges look friendlier. Variety hours that felt like county fairs without the mud. When cowboys galloped across the glass, the maple leaves turned into tiny flags, fluttering with a patriotism no one needed to name. When the set went snowy and the images turned to ghosts, we held still as if movement might scare them away. And when the picture sharpened again, the whole sidewalk softened, the way a face does when someone comes back safe. I rarely saw Mr. Layton himself, only the brief eclipse of a shoulder or the silhouette that proved a person didn't need to speak to be present. Once, when a breeze pressed the curtain inward like a shy visitor, I glimpsed him sitting entirely still. The room lay around him like a garment he wasn't sure he was allowed to wear. His hands were folded, his jaw set, his eyes on the screen the way a man watches weather, respectfully, as if it could change his plans without warning. In that moment I understood that the television hadn't been purchased to impress the town. It had been brought into that room to companion it. Winter arrived the way it always did, first with rumor, then with ice at the edges of puddles, then with a morning that decided not to warm up. My breath made small clouds under the maple, and the screen's glow looked deeper against the early dark. I wore 2 pairs of socks and learned the mathematics of cold, how long you could stand before your knuckles ached, how much you could endure for the gift of one more scene. The curtain, on those nights, opened wider. I grew during those months, though not like corn, straight up, all knees and optimism. I grew the way a town grows around a train schedule, into a person who understood that time can be divided into before the light and after it. The television taught me things no one on the screen intended to teach, that strangers can share silence without embarrassment, that distance can feel like courtesy rather than neglect, that a window can be both a boundary and a bridge. What I did not know then, and what would take me all winter to learn, was that Mr. Layton had seen me from the first evening. Not in the suspicious way adults use to ruin a secret, but in the careful way someone uses to protect one. He had made a decision that would become our ritual. He would not invite me in, he would not usher me away. He would simply open the curtain wider. And I, a boy who could not yet afford a future, would stand beneath the maple and borrow one, night by night, in a blue square that changed our evenings. By Christmas, the routine had become something sacred. I didn't think of it that way, of course. I was just a boy standing in the cold, watching someone else's television through someone else's window. But somewhere between the shortening days and the longer shadows, that blue light became a part of my life the same way soup steam became part of winter, not the meal itself, but the thing that made you believe warmth was coming. The curtain stayed open later now. I knew better than to wave. That wasn't part of the ritual. Mr. Layton never acknowledged me directly, and I never tried to make him. It would have broken the arrangement, whatever it was. This was a contract signed in silence and sealed with flickering images. His part was the light. Mine was the stillness. And so I stood. Almost every evening. Sometimes for 15 minutes, sometimes for a full hour, until the cold slipped too far into my sleeves or my mother tapped once on the glass to remind me I belonged somewhere else. She never told me to stop. But I could see it in her eyes, a question she didn't know how to ask. Mr. Layton became something of a legend. Not just for having the television, others would get there soon enough, but for how he handled it. No invitations. No bragging. No loud volume or neighborhood shows. Just that single glowing room and the curtain that moved like a thought you hadn't decided to say out loud yet. Some adults disapproved. They called it odd. Cold. Why not let the boy inside? I heard one man ask at the post office. Others admired it more quietly. He's giving him something, my teacher said once, not knowing I was listening. And he was. He was giving me access to something I couldn't have had any other way. Not just the programs, but the feeling of being part of a future that hadn't fully arrived yet. One night, just after New Year's, something changed. It had snowed earlier, a thick, heavy snow that softened everything. I stood in my usual spot, boots buried, scarf wrapped twice. The blue glow was already on, warm against the white silence. But the curtain wasn't just open. It was gone. Pulled fully aside. Tied, maybe. Or removed altogether. The room was wide open, like a stage. And Mr. Layton wasn't a shadow that night, he was visible. Sitting in his armchair, one ankle crossed over the other, arms resting quietly. Watching the screen. Just like me. He didn't look over. He didn't nod. But that night, something passed between us, as real as a spoken word. I think he knew I had been there all along. And now he was saying, yes. I see you. I've always seen you. After that, I noticed small things. The picture adjusted just as I arrived, as if he waited until I was in place before settling in. Once, during a particularly funny moment on a variety show, the sound was just loud enough for laughter to reach the porch. Not too loud, but enough that I could catch the rhythm of joy. I began to memorize the faces. Not his, I still rarely saw more than his profile, but the people on the screen. A singer in a glittering dress. A man with exaggerated eyebrows who told jokes that made me laugh even before the punchline landed. A weatherman who seemed to believe clouds had personalities. They became part of my world. And by extension, so did Mr. Layton. At school, other boys began talking about getting TVs. We'll have one by spring, someone said. Dad says maybe next month, another bragged. But none of them had what I had, the quiet, constant light through a window, and a man who never asked me to explain why I kept coming back. I wondered, sometimes, what it was doing for him. Was he watching me, too? Not literally. But in some deeper way. Was I giving him something he didn't know he'd been missing? One night, when the snow had melted and the gutters began to drip again, I showed up a little late. I'd been helping with dishes, dragging my feet. I thought maybe I'd missed the start of the program. But when I turned the corner onto Cedar Street, the curtain was still closed. I stopped. For a moment, disappointment surged. Maybe I had come too late. Maybe the ritual had ended. But then, just as I stepped toward the sidewalk, the curtain pulled back. Just enough. Just in time. And the light returned. He had waited. I'll never know what made Mr. Layton decide to let me in from the cold, not into his house, but into his trust. But in those months, standing in that same spot, I realized something I've never forgotten. Kindness doesn't always open the door. Sometimes, it just opens the curtain and lets the light spill out far enough for someone else to stand in it. The television arrived at our house on a Wednesday. There was no build-up, no talk over dinner, no hints. Just a box in the middle of the living room one afternoon, heavier than it looked and humming faintly like it was already dreaming of something to show us. I stood staring at it, heart pounding like it was Christmas and I hadn't earned it. Dad came in behind me, set down his lunch pail, and wiped his hands on his pants. "All the overtime finally paid for something," he said, not unkindly. He didn't mean it to be a grand moment. But it was. That night, the screen glowed in our house for the first time. And I sat on the floor, cross-legged, a little too close, just like I had always imagined. The room was warm, the sound clear, and the picture sharper than I remembered from Mr. Layton's window. The faces were brighter, the music louder, the world somehow more mine. But something was missing. I didn't know it right away. I only felt it, like a draft from a closed window. It wasn't until the second night, when I reached instinctively for my coat after dinner, that I realized what it was. I missed standing in the cold. Watching from the maple wasn't just about the screen. It was about the ritual. The act of going somewhere. Of being let in without being welcomed. Of being part of something without being invited. Now, inside my own home, I had the show, but not the silence. Not the small stretch of sidewalk where I had become more than a boy. Not the unseen understanding that had lived in the space between me and Mr. Layton's curtain. I didn't go back right away. It felt disloyal. To my parents. To the money that had been saved. To the boy I had been before the screen was ours. But Mr. Layton must have noticed. Because after 3 nights of my absence, the curtain remained drawn. Not closed, not open, just still. Like a stage waiting for its performer. On the 4th night, I slipped out quietly, telling myself I was just going for a walk. The streets felt smaller than I remembered. The houses more ordinary. But when I turned the corner onto Cedar Street, there it was, the window, the glow, and the curtain, half open. He was watching. And though I had my own set now, a newer model, even, I stood there again, under that maple, breath in my throat. Because I missed what it had meant to be allowed to watch. I didn't stay long. Maybe 10 minutes. But it was enough. Enough to remember how much of a gift it had been. Not the show. The permission. Over the next week, I began splitting my time. Some nights at home, others under the maple. Mother noticed. She didn't ask. Dad noticed. He nodded once when I came in and said only, "Still good stories, I bet." He understood more than I thought. And then, one night. The window was dark. I thought I was early. I waited. Nothing. The curtain stayed still. The screen, silent. Mr. Layton was not in his chair. No glow. No shadows. Only the reflection of the street lamp in the cold glass. I told myself maybe it was just a long day. Or maybe a tube had gone out. But the next night, and the one after, were the same. And the maple no longer felt like home. A week later, I saw the wreath on the door. Not large. Not festive. Simple. Respectful. No one had to tell me. The screen had gone dark, because the man behind it had left. I don't remember the funeral. I remember the silence afterward. And the first time I walked by his house again in spring, how the curtains were fully closed, and the porch swing had moved a little in the wind, as if remembering something too. Back at home, our television still worked. I still watched. But it never felt the same. Because I no longer needed the screen to see something beautiful. I had already seen it. In the way a man opened his curtain for a boy he never spoke to. And gave him more than any show ever could. Years passed. The maple grew taller. The street got quieter. And the world moved on, the way it always does, not all at once, but in quiet steps you don't notice until one day the sidewalks feel unfamiliar. I got older. Not all at once either. But slowly, the way leaves brown at the edges before falling. The house I grew up in became smaller each time I visited. The living room where I'd once stared wide-eyed at our first television now held a flat screen, a bookshelf, and no trace of the flicker that used to mean magic. Life became full of newer things. Better pictures. Thinner wires. More buttons than memories. But not Kinder. Never Kinder. One winter, after I'd moved to a nearby city and started a life that looked, from the outside, like it was working, job, schedule, coffee made the same way every morning, I found myself back on Cedar Street. I don't remember what brought me there. Grief, maybe. Or longing. Or just the kind of quiet that pushes you toward something familiar. The house was still there. Mr. Layton's house. The same porch swing, faded now. Same hedge, a little wilder. Someone else lived there, of course. The curtains were different. Brighter. Newer. Closed. I stood across the street, hands in my coat pockets, watching a house that didn't remember me. And then, just as I turned to leave, the light came on. Not the porch. The window. And for the first time in decades, I saw it again. That soft blue glow. The unmistakable flicker of a screen. A new one, surely, slimmer, sharper, colder. But it didn't matter. It was the light that mattered. It was what it meant. I stood there longer than I should have. Not crying. Not smiling. Just remembering. The boy I had been. The man who had never spoken to me. And how between the two of us, we'd built something wordless and lasting. A screen. A window. A curtain pulled back just far enough to say, I see you. You can stand here. You belong. Later that week, I wrote a letter. I didn't know who lived in the house now. I only knew the address. I wrote that I used to stand outside when I was a boy. That the man who lived there changed my life. That sometimes kindness doesn't look like gifts or speeches. Sometimes it just looks like a curtain pulled open without asking why. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. A month later, I passed the house again. There was a note taped to the window. Just one line. The curtain's open. Always. I don't know who wrote it. But I knew what it meant. Someone had felt it too. Someone had stood in their own kind of silence and been seen. Now, as I sit in my own home, a different town, a different time, I keep a chair near the front window. And every so often, when the evening feels a little too quiet, I turn on the television. I open the curtain. And I let the blue light spill out onto the street. Just in case someone out there needs to see it. Just in case they're waiting for a sign that they belong. Because long ago, someone I never met did that for me. And I never forgot.